but having parents who not only desired to help me, but had the ability to help me exceed academically. And a number of the children that we work with do not have that advantage. So why consider tutoring on Thursday nights? One, it helps bless and helps children who are starting far behind the starting line succeed academically, either behind the starting line because of language or because of learning challenges. Secondly, I think you'll find that while you're blessing these children, you yourself will be blessed. In fact, perhaps more greatly blessed. They come in the evening often with smiles, laughter, lots of energy, and eager to improve. And then I would say as a serendipity, there actually is no greater joy than playing a game with a child who seldom wins and watching them win. There are ways you can let them win, and they don't know it. But there is great joy in seeing that happening. And so I'd like to encourage you, if you have the time and the opportunity, Thursday nights we need tutors. We especially need substitutes for when our tutors are not present. Again, I will say we've done this for a long time. One of the joys is that we now have some tutors who help, who actually went through the program and are now either in high school or college and have come back to pay it back. And so we need tutors. The only thing that will exempt you is if you're not able to read, write, add, or subtract, then this program is not for you. But again, I hope you'll consider our tutoring program.
Good morning, church. Grateful to be here with you this morning. Just a couple of quick announcements for the youth ministry. Tonight, our Anchor and Flourish small groups kick off. So I'm excited about this. We're going to gather together up here in the backyard area. I'll be grilling burgers, and we'll have dinner together, and then we'll play some lawn games, and then we'll transition into the church building and break off into our small groups from there for devotional. And the following week, we'll be back at the church for our regular Sunday evening devotionals. So those are now in the church building. And briefly, I have a silent auction winner for, quote, babysitting parents' night out. But there's no one who wrote their name. So there's a winner, but I don't know who made the offer. So so two things. If you did make this offer, if you could let me know so I could make the connection with the auction winner, and also if you're offering more of these, let me know, because might take you, or might do my own bid. That's it. Thank you so much.
Good morning. I don't have anything to ask you for. I just want to say thank you so much. Last night was an incredible success. We had 60 kids come through our doors. We had 50 of all of you here signed up to volunteer. More of you showed up without actually signing up, so I only have a record of about 50. We served and blessed over 200 people last night. It's amazing. I just want to say thank you so much. I had such a supportive team. There were people here all week decorating, buying prizes, organizing things, setting up, stringing lights, finding extension cords, going to the dollar store for batteries. It was incredible. I hope that you were able to be here to witness the blessing that you all were to our community. There were so many faces here that were brand new, and I was so encouraged by that. And I want to encourage all of you to keep reaching out to your neighbors, your friends, your coworkers. Spread the word. There is something good happening here, and I am excited about it, and I would love to continue to keep serving as many kids as possible. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And I look forward to doing it again next year in some way, shape, or form. If you are a child, nursery through 5th grade, we have classes prepared for you, and it is at this time that you may walk on back.
from Romans chapter 6, verses 1 through 3. What then are we to say? Should we continue in sin in order that grace may increase? By no means. How can we who died to sin go on living in it? Do you not know that all of us who were baptized into Christ were baptized into his death? Therefore, we were buried with him by baptism into death, so that, just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, so we also may walk in newness of life. For if we've been united with him in a death like his, we will certainly be united with him in a resurrection like his. We know that our old self was crucified with him so that the body of sin might be destroyed, so we might no longer be enslaved to sin. For whoever has died is free from sin. But if we died with Christ, we believe that we will also live with him. We know that Christ, being raised from the dead, will never die again. Death no longer has dominion over him. The death he died to sin once for all. But the life he lives to God. So you also must consider yourselves dead to sin and alive to God in Christ Jesus.
Let's start with a little audience participation, if you're willing. And it's based on the idea that everyone loves a winner. And so I'm going to read out the first half of a well-known phrase, and I want you to respond with the second half of that phrase. Just call it out from your seat, all right? You ready? Here we go. Vince Lombardi famously said, "Winning isn't everything. It's the only thing. It's not a race tie." But that's great. Well done. Oh, who was? Oh, it's Matt. All right. Well done, Matt. You were quick. My idea is just we'll say it kind of together. Is that all right? But you won, Matt. So way to go. So winning isn't everything. Okay. How about this one? Winners never quit, and that's right. Very good. Okay, this one's from Top Gun. There are no points for. All right, getting a little harder maybe. John F. Kennedy popularized this one. I don't think it was original with him. Success has many fathers, but failure is an orphan. That's right. And then last one, history is written by the winners or the victors. That's right. Now, I think it's fair to say that in our culture, we love to win, whether that's in sports or finances or in social status or in politics. And perhaps just as much, we hate to lose. Various athletes, including Larry Bird, are credited with saying something like, "I hate to lose more than I like to win." Now, I'm not one of those people, but I know people like that, and they're hard to beat. They are hard to beat. Most of us, though, want to be seen as moving forward, as prospering, as succeeding, as moving up and to the right, like we hope the stock market will be doing. And one of the worst things that we can call someone is a failure or a loser. And I want to say, as we begin today, that I do not aspire to failure or losing any more than you do. But I'm going to bring what will be today perhaps a counter perspective. Because in 1 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul pushes against this mindset, which was just as widespread and established in the Greco-Roman world of the first century as it is in our world today. The ancient world loved its heroes, from Hercules of Thebes to Aeneas of Troy, from Athena of Athens to Cleopatra of Alexandria, from Achilles of Thessaly to Caesar Augustus of Rome. So you can imagine that inviting these hero-loving Corinthians to put their faith in a crucified Messiah, which you could just translate as total loser. Okay, I mean that's crucified Messiah. That's basically how that codes. That might be a bit of a tough sell. But Paul believes that the message of Christ and Him crucified offers a whole new way to see and engage with the world. So today we are continuing with our fall series that we're calling Words of Life, in which we're digging deeper into some of the key words of the New Testament. And today our key word is the cross. And by the way, I am thankful to Kendi DeLong, who preached in my absence last Sunday on the theme of faith and trust in Romans and Galatians, a substantive and important message. Now, to help us understand or appreciate what Paul is working against, we may need to desanitize or undomesticate the cross. Because I think in our day, the cross has lost its horror and its dread. Now, I have no objection to what we do every Easter when we invite our kids to bring flowers and to weave them into a cross, and that becomes then a symbol of the cross, which is this instrument of death, becomes this reminder that life comes even on the far side of the cross. So I got no, you can find lots of pretty flowery decorated crosses, but I also want to say for us grown-ups, let's not soft pedal the hideousness of the cross. The historian and theologian Martin Hangel's in-depth study of crucifixion in the ancient world argued that the crucifixion as a means of capital punishment was unparalleled in its social and religious shame in the Roman world. It was regarded as the most cruel and contemptible form of execution. It was a torturous ordeal designed to inflict both maximum pain and maximum humiliation. The victim was typically stripped naked, publicly exposed on crowded highways, and denied a proper burial. And crucifixion was primarily reserved for slaves and non-citizens and hard criminals, pirates and insurrectionists, the most despised elements of society. It was a potent punishment, demonstrating the power of Rome and serving as a terrifying public deterrent. Don't mess with Rome, or Rome will crush you. Now, the proclamation of a crucified Messiah or the Son of God who went to the cross was a logical paradox, presenting a contradiction in terms for both Jews and for Greco-Romans, for Gentiles. Now, for the Jews, it would remind them of a curse that was in their own scripture. Deuteronomy 21, cursed is anyone who hangs on a tree. This is not exactly the way God would go about validating God's Messiah. And for the Greeks and the Romans, the notion of a God who separates a humiliating slave-like death is ridiculous. That is utter folly. In ancient mythology, in fact, suffering gods or suffering heroes were quickly rescued from their suffering, or their suffering was merely a simulation. It wasn't what it looked like. Now, such shame that is associated with the crucifixion, I think, helps explain some early Christian heresies, like in the 2nd century, the heresy of Docetism. Now, the Docetics argued that Christ only seemed to suffer and die, because crucifixion is such a scandalous and discrediting thing. You could see how some of those early Christians said, look, let's disassociate Jesus. Let's move him away from crucifixion. Let's emphasize other aspects of his life or his ministry, because that's just bad PR. That's not going to get the message across. But the ancient Christians rejected Docetism. They said, no. Jesus wasn't just a hovercraft human who kind of seemed to suffer and seemed to go to the cross and seemed to endure. It really was the presence of the Son of God there. Still, we may legitimately wonder, what was God's marketing department thinking? Leonard Allen puts it this way: we love life, and the cross points to death. We strive to be winners, and the cross implies defeat. We delight in what is lovely and beautiful, and the cross suggests all that is crude and ugly. But one of Paul's favorite missionary sermons centered on this strange symbol of our faith, the cross. And in writing his first letter to the Corinthians, who, by the way, were squabbling like siblings, Paul set out to bring them back to square one. And so I'd like to read our theme text for us now. The message of the cross, or about the cross, is foolishness to those who are perishing. But to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scholar? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, God decided through the foolishness of the proclamation to save those who believe. For Jews ask for signs, Greeks desire wisdom, but we proclaim Christ crucified, a stumbling block, literally a scandal to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles, but to those who are called both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. For God's foolishness is wiser than human wisdom, and God's weakness is stronger than human strength. In this text, Paul lays out two conventional ways of knowing God, but then he offers a third way. The first way is we can come to know God through dramatic displays of power, right? God in a miracle. And I would warn us that this way lies the prosperity gospel, but I will also say that God is capable and has done miracles in history. And the Jews certainly were formed by the Exodus and the parting of the Red Sea and the remembering each year at Passover of how they were slaves in Egypt and how God brought them forth with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Now, when the Jewish people thought about Messiah, they hoped for someone like King David, God's anointed one who whooped up on Goliath and pushed out the Philistines and even took over the city of Jerusalem from the Jebusites. For them, a crucified Messiah would have been a paradox. Jews couldn't imagine the Messiah stripped naked and crucified like a common criminal is the ultimate discrediting of anyone who might claim to be Messiah. Secondly, we might also come to know, as Paul illustrates, God through carefully reasoned discourse. God at the end of a syllogism, if you will. And of course, the Greeks prized wisdom and loved the intelligence of the philosophers. But Christ didn't exactly fit into their expectations of heroic achievement. A loser cannot be a hero. And for upper-class Romans, even mentioning the cross in public was in bad taste. The Roman statesman Cicero said, "Let even the name of the cross be kept away, not only from the bodies of the citizens of Rome, but also from their thought, sight, and hearing." Now, to be fair here, Paul is not against wisdom per se. Paul certainly used considerable rhetorical skills in composing his letters, and he was not afraid to write just a chapter later, "We speak God's wisdom." And he was arguably the best educated first generation Christian. But Paul also knew that human wisdom could get you about as far as Damascus, but not much further. So Paul then offers here in 1 Corinthians 1 a third way of knowing God. The third way of knowing God is through a stunning and paradoxical display of divine love. God on a cross. A crucified Messiah? Inconceivable. A hero who dies? Laughable. But Paul says we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews, foolishness to the Gentiles, but to those whom God has called, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. God apparently is not beholden to human wisdom. You can't box God up and say, "God, you can't behave that way." Carl Holliday put it this way: the cross doesn't so much defy human wisdom as it transcends it. It rises above it. So Paul was challenging the Corinthians' mindset that was dividing the Corinthian church into factions. And you remember in 1 Corinthians 1, there's a group over here that says, I belong to Paul, and another group, I belong to Apollos, I belong to Cephas. Well, I belong to Christ. You know, that's the self-righteous group. Anyway, the root problem of this fragmentation was that the Corinthians had misunderstood the nature of Christian community. And where they looked for heroic power or heroic or impressive miracles, Christ offered self-sacrificial love and humble servanthood. And when they were tempted to sexual self-indulgence, Christ bought them with a price and said their bodies were temples for the Holy Spirit. All of this is in 1 Corinthians. When they vied for status and prestige, Christ offered a communion table where the poor were just as welcomed and honored as the wealthy. When they sought flashy and impressive spiritual gifts like tongue speaking in 1 Corinthians 14, Christ modeled a love that was not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. Corinthians 13. So Nijay Gupta brings this together nicely in his book on the New Testament words, where he says, what do we come to learn when we notice how cross and crucifixion language is used by the apostles is that the cross of Christ is not just a wooden object, neither is it just a place. It is a context in which God uses the life, suffering, death, and new life of Jesus to teach believers a whole new way to think and live. God's choice to come in human form and to go to the cross gives us a whole new way to think and live. And Paul in 1 Corinthians is concerned whether or not these believers will be shaped by human wisdom or by God's power. And Paul wants to convey in a life-changing way that the Messiah they honored had died in shame and pain because of his love for others and for their sins. And God has shown the foolish wisdom of the cross to reorient us toward love as the greatest expression of God's way. Now, as Kendi said last week, it's one thing to believe in Jesus, to have faith, in the idea, but trust is a different notion. And it's another thing to let Jesus' way to seep in and to transform your values and perspectives. And I want to invite you to consider the difference between paint and varnish when applied to wood. All right, I've been doing a lot of painting lately, so maybe this comes to mind. But paint forms this opaque film that bonds with the surface fibers of the wood, and it provides protection from things coming in on the outside. But it's about skin deep. I've learned that you can scrape off paint. Now, sometimes it takes some elbow grease, but it's doable. But varnish is designed to penetrate. And it saturates those wood fibers, and it provides protection from within, not just from the outside. And it seems to me that, as Paul is addressing the Corinthians, that some of them were content to slap a little Jesus paint on the exterior of their lives. But we can still observe in the Corinthians the dominant cultural values of their Roman neighbors, the pursuit of power and social status. And so the Corinthians still are apparently, even though they've got Jesus, they're also still worried about things like having the right friends and following the leaders and heroes who are moving up in the world and finding ways to move up the ladder themselves. The cross teaches us, though, a whole new way to think and to live. And I wonder if we're much different than the Corinthians. Are we concerned with having a superficial veneer of Christianity in our life, to slap a little Jesus paint on the outside, but inside we're still just as filled with envy and greed and pride and hatred and lust as anybody else? Are we content to wear a cross, to slap a fish sticker on the back of our car, while inside we're still striving for the same power and status as everyone else and willing to win at any cost? Is it possible that we need to challenge the kind of heroes that we cherish, that we have yet to fully embrace a whole new way to think and live, a willingness to suffer for the sake of love. That's the message and the lesson of the cross. And until we absorb that like varnish, we may just be cruising at the top at a superficial level in our faith. I saw two quotes in the last couple weeks that talk about suffering that made me think about this message from 1 Corinthians 1 about having a God who is willing to enter into the deepest kind of human suffering to show love, to bring forgiveness of sin, and to teach us this new way, a new way of loving. The first is from Philaret. He was an Orthodox metropolitan in the 1800s. And he wrote that God triumphs over suffering by passing through suffering. And the longer I live, and the more I'm aware of the suffering that is a part of world history, whether in ancient times or right up to the very last moment, this matters more and more to me. Dietrich Bonhoeffer famously wrote that only the suffering God can help. And he wrote this, of course, while he was in a Nazi prison camp awaiting execution. And I think for those who are undergoing suffering, it's important to know that God isn't like some Olympian deity up there on the mountain looking down on human misery, but aloof from it and untouched by it. That the message that Paul is pointing to of a Messiah who's willing to suffer and die on behalf of all of humankind is a God who enters into the fray, the pain, the heartache, the suffering. This God is not distant, aloof, or removed from that. The longer I live, the more important that becomes to me. That matters to me. Paul Claudette, who is a poet, wrote, "God did not come to explain suffering. He came to fill it with his presence." And so God enters our human suffering profoundly through the cross of Jesus. And suffering doesn't get the final word, but it's a reality that God reckons with, sharing it in solidarity with us, and then passing to the other side. And I don't know about you, but that matters to me when I sit with people who are suffering, who are watching loved ones suffer. It matters to me that God has been through the depth of it, been to the cross, suffered through that, and then come out on the other side. And so what I'm trying to say today is that the cross teaches us a whole new way to think and live. A way that's willing to embrace suffering as an expression of love on behalf of others. And I know that this has been abused, especially by those in power, telling those who are enslaved, well, it's your lot in life to suffer because, that's what Christ did. I'm not wanting to use it that way. I'm speaking to people who have power and who have influence and who have sway. And I'm inviting us to think about using our power and our influence and our sway in a humble way, not lording it over, but coming alongside and entering into and walking beside those who are suffering and struggling and who don't have much power to speak of. Leonard Griffin observed that when Christianity loses touch with the cross, it grows weak. And when it renews contact, it renews its strength. And so, church, I would invite us to remember that at the heart of the Christian message is the cross. And I invite us and ask that we would allow the message of the cross to permeate our lives, to soak into our hidden thoughts and our hidden attitudes, and to change us little by little so that we are more and more like Jesus in all we think and say and do. Let's stand and sing.
Our benediction today is from Galatians chapter 6, verses 14 through 15. May I never boast of anything except the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ, by which the world has been crucified to me and I to the world. For neither circumcision nor uncircumcision is anything, but a new creation is everything. Go in peace.